Hi, I'm Laura Nelkin. I'm a knitwear designer. I live in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, and this is a companion video for Cuentas Collar. I am wearing Cuentas Collar right now, so you can see that it is a 5-strand I-cord statement necklace. The strands on Cuentas Collar are worked with beads and without beads. They alternate between those, and it creates this necklace that has this really great drape and kind of just fun movement to it. So I knit my Cuentas collar. I knit a few of them as I was trying them out, and I knit them with knitting needles, and I also made some with a 3-stitch I-cord tool. So this video tutorial is going to teach you how to work Cuentas collar on knitting needles and also how to work it with a 3-stitch I-cord tool. We're going to talk about materials. We are going to talk about techniques for using that I-cord tool, and then we'll get into making the strands and then how to finish the necklace. It is important that you have the pattern as you follow along with this video. I won't be talking about row counts in depth or beads being strung on in depth. You need to have the video to follow along with those points. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk about the materials that you're going to need to knit Cuentas collar, and then we will roll into everything else. Okay, you can knit Cuentas collar with a Cuentas kit, or you can go stash diving. The Cuentas kit, I have a separate video that tells you about everything in the kit. I will link to it below. If you're gonna go stash diving, you wanna find some sport weight or DK weight yarn that your size 6 beads fit on and slide smoothly on. So you'll kind of wanna play with your beads and play with your yarn and make sure that when you string on the size 6 beads that they slide smoothly. Size 6 beads have about 12 beads to the gram to give you an idea of what you should be looking for if you are going shopping for beads. You'll also need a dental floss threader for stringing on those beads, and then you'll either need 2 double pointed needles at about a US size 2, which is 2.75 millimeter. You might end up needing to go bigger or smaller, or you can use a 3-stitch I-cord tool. Let's look at that I-cord tool underneath the camera. An I-cord tool is a tool that is made with 3 knitting machine needles. I'll be teaching you how to use that. And I also have a blog post that goes in depth about everything you need to know about a 3-stitch tool, how you can make one of your own, where you can purchase one if you want to purchase one, and then different things that you can do with your I-cord tool. Once I figured out that I could make beaded I-cord with this, I am so obsessed and really into it, and I keep doing different things with it. So if you have all of those things, the only other thing you're going to need is maybe a few removable stitch markers that you'll use as you work your strands, just so you know which is your cast on end and which is your bind off end. And then a sharp tapestry needle. Oh, and finally, what you're really going to need for a Cuentas collar is a 5-strand slide clasp. And you'll definitely get one of these if you get a kit, but if you don't have a kit, you'll be able to find them at a store that carries jewelry findings or supplies. And I can give you an idea, if you can't find them, of where you might be able to find one that you'll like. So that's everything that you need to make a Cuentas collar. And now that you know that, let's talk about gauge a little bit, which is somewhat important for sizing your Cuentas collar, and then we'll get into techniques with the I-cord tool. Okay, so you'd think that gauge doesn't really matter with a necklace, and the only reason that gauge matters is because you'll want your necklace to be the length that you love on you. I've designed Cuentas to have the smallest strand be about 15 inches around, because that's the strand that probably matters that most, the first one, and then each strand is consecutively longer from there. So in the pattern, I give you gauge for the I-cord, both beaded and non-beaded. If you don't get the exact same gauge that I did, it's really okay. What you'll do at the end when you've made all of your strands is stop and block them, and then you can look at those lengths of those strands and either add a little bit more on if you feel like you want them a little bit longer, or you can take some rows out before you go to put them onto the clasp. So there's a moment to kind of adjust things. I think with I-cord, especially when you're working with the I-cord tool, all of our gauges are going to be a little bit different. So I designed this so you could really decide exactly the length that you want your necklace to be and then adjust as necessary. So now that we've talked about that, let's get into working with that I-cord tool, because I know a few of you are very excited for this next part of this video. So this little I-cord tool that I'm working with today, I made with some knitting machine needles, and I'll give you a link to the YouTube live where I talk about all the materials that I purchased and how to make it. I actually make it with you all live in that YouTube video. So I'll link to that below. But I'm going to be working with this I-cord tool today, and I've just got some nice smooth hand-painted yarn with me right here because I think it's going to be really easy for you to see how I'm doing this cast on and then working the I-cord. So right now I'm going to be casting onto the tool, and you can see that I have the end of my yarn right here and the working yarn right here. So what I'm going to do is go over that last hook right there and then under the middle hook and then over the first hook, and I've just got my tail kind of hanging down right there. And then I'm going to take my working yarn, which is hanging to the back, and very importantly, before I go to do that, you can see the latches on this hook, how they kind of open and close right that on each hook. You want to make sure that those latches are all the way open when you go and wrap your yarn around. So you can see the yarn that I cast on is underneath the latch, and then the yarn that I just wrapped around is in front of the latch. And now what I'm going to do for this cast on is I'm going to manually close all of those latches, and I'm going to manually take my finger and jump that loop on the back needle over, and then I'm going to take this loop that I had going over the front needle and just lift it over, and then I'm going to slide all three of those stitches back. And now I'm set up and cast on. I've played with a few different cast ons because these are knitting machine needles. When I first was doing a cast on, I was doing what's called like a backwards loop or an E cast on. And I found that the start was really tight and hard to do. And this is the cast on, if you don't pull tight, you'll see I was doing that very, very gently, that I find is really easy to start working with. So now my working yarn is always going to be coming off this last loop on the back hook, and I'm going to bring it underneath and then over those three hooks. And for this first few rows, these are the hardest rows, and I think it's where people get frustrated. You'll see that I'm kind of pulling down on the tail a little bit to get some tension, and I'm actually going to just go and slide all three of those stitches up and over for that first row, because I think it really helps you get going and have just a little bit of a base. And now I'm going to wrap the yarn around, and now that I have a base, I can pull down and kind of squeeze those needles together a little bit with my fingers if I need to, and then slide back beyond those hoops, those latches. And now I'm just going to keep going like this, wrapping the yarn, pulling it around, wrapping the yarn, pulling it around. You'll see sometimes if things feel a little tight, I'll squeeze those needles together. If you can get those loops a little bit looser as you get going, the need to squeeze becomes not as necessary because those loops are just a little bit bigger and it's easier for them to slide. I'm trying to go slow so that you can really see the mechanics of this, so that you understand what's happening as I make this 3-stitch I-cord. So fast, definitely faster than knitting once you get into the flow of it. I would say that there is a learning curve, and if you just go grab some smooth, fun yarn and sit outside and play with it for a little while and maybe watch this a few times, all of a sudden this action will probably click for you. I found one thing, I know I do yoga a lot, and oftentimes my yoga teacher will be like, drop your shoulders, take a deep breath. So when I was first learning how to work with the I-cord tool, I was like so tense and I was holding it super duper tight and my shoulders were like touching my ears. So it really helps to relax. And then you can just get in and wrap the yarn and pull it through. And remember, as you pull back, you go beyond those latches. So the latches are open when you wrap the yarn around and pull it through. So I've kept doing this because I've been hoping that I would make a mistake and then I could teach you how to fix mistakes. And I think what I'm going to do is just wrap over two by mistake and then be like, oh my goodness, what just happened? I made a mistake. So this is what I do. This is how I found is the easiest way to fix mistakes. What I'll do is pinch underneath and I'll take my work off of the tool. And then I'll rip back until things are looking good. And when they're looking good, the last stitch worked with the yarn coming off it is the stitch that goes here. That goes onto this back hook right here. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to grab this double pointed needle. I think it'll work better. I'm going to take a double pointed needle and I'm going to go into each of those stitches across, and I'm going to make sure that I don't split the stitches and that they're also all oriented on the needle correctly. And sometimes, so this one I can actually see that I've got the left leg to the front. So sometimes I'll grab a second knitting needle once I've got them on there and go back across and make sure all of those stitches are on there and oriented correctly, because then it is so easy to take your tool and go into that stitch with that hook, and then the middle stitch with the middle hook, and then the front stitch with the front hook going across. Of course, that one didn't go as well. But when I found that I was trying to fix mistakes by just taking the loops and trying to get them back onto the tool, what would happen was as I got the tool through one loop, it would collapse and then I wouldn't be able to get the next hook through. So having the knitting needle go through all of those stitches makes it so the loops can't collapse all the way because they collapse against the knitting needle and then stay there as a stitch. So if you do that when you make mistakes, and you will make them, that's going to be the way to fix yourself. So now I can just kind of continue on because I fixed that mistake. If another one happens, we'll fix one again, but you can go back and watch that. That fix went very well. So the concept is the same. The really big trick is to pinch underneath and then just rip back until you have that working yarn at the same point as the last, sorry, I'm losing my words, my last hook on the tool. So the next thing that y'all are going to ask me about is like, well, how do I finish? How do I bind off? And the way that I bind off that I find looks like the cast on the most is what I'll do is I'll take the loop on the last hook and I will move it to the middle hook and push it all the way to the back. So behind that latch right there. And then I'll just go and work these stitches together on the middle and the front hook and pull them through. And then what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and take that front loop off. And sometimes you need to make it a little bit bigger to get it off so you don't lose it. And I take that loop and I put it onto the middle needle. You could probably also take the loop on the middle needle and bring it to the front needle. And then I wrap the yarn around and pull it through right there. And then I'm all finished off, and then I'll grab some sharp scissors and I will cut myself a tail and then pull that tail through. And now I have a little I-cord that I made with the cast on and then a bunch of rows and then the bind off. So interestingly, with any I-cord I make with the I-cord tool, I always end up blocking it because I find it looks much better and looses up and the stitches get all even and tidy after I block it. So I even end up blocking I-cord that I make with my tool. I definitely block the strands for the Cuentas collar. So now that you know how to work with your I-cord tool, let's jump into things that you need to know about the Cuentas collar. Okay, before you get started making your strands, whether you are knitting them with double pointed needles or using the I-cord tool, you'll need to string beads onto your yarn. If you have never strung beads onto your yarn before, I do have a separate tutorial to teach you how to do that. I'm not going to do that in this video because I know many of you know how to do that. I have a video that shows you 5 different tools for stringing on beads. My favorite is a dental floss threader, and if you got a Cuentas kit, you got one in your Cuentas kit. Um, you can choose with your beads. So strands 1, 3, and 5 are beaded. Strand 1 has the least number of beads because that's the shortest strand. Strand 5 has the most beads on it because that's the longest strand. You can choose to string your beads in with each color individually. The kit has 3 different colors in it, or you can mix them all together. If you are working from stash, you could use the same color bead for every strand, or you could find 3 different color beads or whatever you want to do. The sky is the limit. I'm very excited to see how you all play with this pattern. So mix them together, work with them individually, get them strung on your yarn. I just string for a strand at a time, and I tended to work all 3 of my beaded strands and then the 2 plain strands. That's up to you, but I would string one at a time so you don't have as many to be pushing down your yarn as you are working your strand. So once you've gotten yourself set up with some beads on your yarn, now let's talk about how to incorporate those beads into the I-cord. All right, so let's jump right in beading strand number 1. I've got some beads pre-strung on my yarn. They are all mixed up. I felt like having fun with these guys. And you will see that the pattern has you work 5 rows plain before you start with your beads. I've actually got 4 rows on my needles right here. So I'm just going to work 1 more row. And when I see needles, I mean my I-cord tool. And now I've got 5 rows plain and I'm ready to start working with the beads. So what I'm going to do is go down my yarn and grab 2 beads and just slide them up so that they're on the working yarn that comes underneath the 3 latch hooks. And then I'm going to wrap my yarn around and I'm going to pull those stitches through. And you might find that it's a little bit tighter to do that when you first do that because the beads kind of take up the extra slack of the yarn a little bit. And now I'm going to wrap the yarn around and work 1 row without beads. And it might help to kind of, I don't know if you saw, but my left hand kind of pushed those beads down a little bit so they were out of the way. Let's do that a few more times because it's a 2-row repeat when you're working with the beads. 1 row that has 2 beads and 1 row that does not have any beads. So I'm going to wrap the yarn around. I'm going to kind of make sure things are tight and nice. And now I'm going to do without any beads, and I'm going to kind of hold those beads down a little bit to pull that through. If things start to get tight, you can pull up a little bit and make your stitches a little bit looser. And now you can see those beads on the I-cord right there. I can't stop doing this. It's so fun. So I'm going to do 1 with 2 beads and then 1 without. If you run into a problem, what you're going to do is pinch and take your I-cord tool out, rip back a row or 2, get your stitches back onto a knitting needle. Use like a size 1, size 2 knitting needle to get your stitches on the knitting needle. If you're working with the Ericanite linen, sometimes this linen can be a little splitty, so you want to be really careful as you get those stitches on the needle that all of your strands from the yarn are on the needle, and then you'll put your hook right back in like I taught you how to do. And that is how you make the beaded strand with the I-cord tool. Not so hard once you know, once you've practiced and you know how to cast on and bind off and work those plain rows. Adding in the beads is pretty simple. I love how these strands look. I'll just kind of grab one that I made over here. I love how these strands look with the beads on them. This strand is blocked, so it looks much neater once it's been blocked. And the other thing I really wanted to point out at this point is you can see on the end of this strand where I did the bind off, I placed a removable stitch marker. If you don't have a stitch marker when you cut your yarn, leaving yourself a nice long tail, you could just tie a knot in this end so you know which end is the bind off. And that is because when you go to attach these to the clasp, if you end up wanting to change the length of these at all, you need to know which end you bound off at, because that is going to be the easy end to rip out some rows. If you go to rip out from the cast on row, which I did one time, which is why I know this step is really important, I couldn't kind of get myself back on track and I ended up having to redo that whole cord. So do this trick. It is helpful. You will thank me later. Now that we've gone over how to do the beaded cord with this the I-cord tool, let's go ahead and do it with some knitting needles in case you are going to knit this with knitting needles and not with the I-cord tool. Okay, if you are working I-cord with your knitting needles, I'm going to show you quickly how to work I-cord plain in case you haven't worked I-cord before. It is very, very easy. The big trick with I-cord is that you're always on the right side of your work. So you're always knitting and you never turn your work. You do need to work I-cord on double pointed needles because you're sliding your knitting to the other end of your work. Let me show you what that means. So I've already got 3 stitches cast on right here, and I've worked a few rows, but I need to work 5 rows plain total, so I'll work 2 rows with you. I am going to go into the first stitch on the needle, wrap my yarn around and pull it through. I am knitting, and I am going to knit all 3 stitches right here. Remember, I said that this yarn splits a little bit easily, so you might find that it's easier to work with a needle that doesn't have a super sharp tip. If you find that your yarn is splitting a lot, that is a trick that can, oh, I just did that without even thinking about it. So I got to the end of that row and I had all of those stitches on my right hand needle. Now what I'm going to do is take those stitches, slide them to the other end of the needle, and then I'm going to knit 3. And that is the big trick to I-cord, that I'm never turning my work. When I get to that end of that knit 3 right there, I'm taking all of my stitches, I am sliding them to the other end of my needle. And now I have 5 stitches on my needle and I am going to work a beaded row. Okay, so now we are starting to work with the beads and I'm going to knit 3. And then at the end of the row, I'm going to go ahead and go down my yarn and get 2 beads and slide them up so that they are touching the right hand needle. And I'm going to slide those stitches across. And now I'm going to go ahead and knit 3 again. And I've got those beads right there, just like with the I-cord. And once I get to the end of these 3 knit stitches, I can show you what is happening with them. So you can see that those beads are on that strand of yarn that's sliding in between the first and third stitch. And now I'm going to slide that needle through and I'm going to knit 1 row plain. And then I am going to slide 2 beads up. Just go down my yarn and get them. So once again, you are alternating between a row with beads slipped up and a row that is plain. The beads were just too close together when I worked them every row, and I found that it got kind of all jumbled up and tight. So working that plain row in between them lets the beads relax a little bit. so that they make that really nice blocked I-cord. Even with this I-cord, you are also going to want to block it. It will be so much nicer once you block it. So really, once you work a few inches of this with the beading, you could stop and block it and see what you think about the row gauge and just about the cord you're making. If you like the gauge of the cord you're making, then you can go ahead and adjust the lengths so that you love the necklace on you. So that is how you work with beads on the I-cord if you are working with double pointed needles. And once you have made all 5 of your strands, let's talk about finishing the necklace together. Okay, this next step is really fun because you're going to get to see your color come together. You can see down underneath the camera that I've knit. I actually made these on my I-cord tool. So I made I-cord in 5 different lengths. This is strand 1, this is strand 5. I've got those plain cords and the beaded cords. And it is time, after they've all been blocked, actually, so they're all looking really nice and neat, it is time to attach them to the clasp. And I find that this step is the easiest to do if you're sitting at a table so you don't end up twisting any strands. And you'll see that what's going to happen is your strands from this side are going to get attached to this side of the clasp, and then your strands on this side are going to get attached to this side of the clasp. This side right here, I like to have all of my cast on ends so you can get them onto the clasp and secure them pretty well. And then this side, I'll attach them, but I'll attach them loosely so that if I end up deciding I want to change the length of any of the cords, I can go ahead and easily do that on the bound off side. And the other thing that I do before I really get into attaching all of these is I'll start with just the first strand to make sure that I like the length of the shortest strand on me before I go ahead and attach all of the others. So to keep this whole video from looking a little too crazy, I think what I'll do is take those other 4 strands out of the way because I think you'll understand what I'm doing right here. Okay, I have a nice sharp needle on here that has a small eye so that it can go through that top strand hole in the clasp, but you might find that it's hard to get this needle to go through the cord. So sometimes what I'll do after I get through the eye is I'll go ahead and grab a tapestry needle that's got a blunt tip, and that's going to be a little easier for embedding the cord, the tail into the cord. And what you want to do is really get this in there and then weave back and forth a few times so that the cord is really, really secure in there and it's not going to come undone because you don't want this to kind of loosen up over time. So I'm going to do that a few times and tighten it up. And then we're going to talk about finishing these cords in a second once we get this kind of done. So I've got that one all fastened on that end. And then when I come to this end and I go to fasten on this side, I'm going to do it very loosely and make sure that you just do this end a little bit loosely so that if you end up not liking the length of the necklace, you can just pull this end out and try again. Really easy to do. I think that that makes sense to everybody. The last thing I want to talk about finishing is when you have all of your strands attached and they are hanging like this and you are happy with the length of your necklace and you're happy with every strand right there. You could just cut your yarn right there and it probably won't worm out, but because I am working with linen and linen tends to kind of like to work out, I have found that I like to finish off this step by using a little bit of fabric glue. This Aleene's Fabric Fusion is a permanent fabric adhesive that when it dries is flexible. You don't want to use very much of it. It will dry clear. You won't see it on your I-cord. You end up putting it on the back of the I-cord. But what I'll do right here is I'll go ahead and trim this close right there. And then I will take some of this and I will squeeze it on right there, and then just kind of glue that end down and in so that it can't worm its way out. And I think that you'll find that that will help your necklace really, or your collar, sorry, really have some lovely longevity to it. So you don't need to do that, but I do highly suggest it. And I've been doing that with linen and cotton yarns for quite some time to make sure that those ends stay where I want them to. So that is everything that you need to know to make your own Cuentas collar. Of course, I would love if you have any questions. All the things I talked about where I said that there are extra videos, those are linked below. If you loved making Cuentas collar and you want to make more, I'll give you a link to kits below. Please let me know if you have any questions, and have an awesome time making and wearing Cuentas collar. Happy knitting!